Someone once said that you can't go home again, but they lacked vision. And a temporal discombobulator.
Welcome to the fresh level 60 guide specifically created for hardcore. First of all, I want to congratulate you for hitting level 60. Especially if it is your very first character, this is not a small achievement. In order to respect your own invested time, but also respect other people's invested time, it is very crucial to play very carefully from here on and respect some basic guidelines. In the following chapters I would like to present some generic tips for what to do when you just hit level 60 and want to delve deeper into the endgame content. This guide will have mainly 3 sections: open world advice, vital potions and dungeon tips. So no further talking, let's jump right into the first chapter. Chapter 1: Toolkit and Items. In Classic there exist a handful of items which I define as the Lifesaver Toolkit in this video. Make sure to obtain all of these items and carry them with you at any time. Do not recklessly put them onto your bank thinking you may never need them anyway. This is usually when things happen. The following items are extremely useful in hardcore and can be obtained quite easily. First of all, I want to start with possibly the best item in game. This one is Alliance only and definitely on top of the list here. The Light of Elune. This item basically works like a 10-second paladin bubble, with a small but very important difference in hardcore. You are able to use your Hearthstone while having this bubble active. Since the classic bubble plus heart is disabled in hardcore, Light of Elune is essentially the only item which allows you to still perform it. This item is a one-time use per character, so there is no way to obtain a second one ever. When it comes to using this effectively, you need to understand that this bubble only lasts exactly 10 seconds, just as long as your Hearthstone needs to cast. This means you need to use both of the items simultaneously. To avoid risking that your Light of Elune runs out before your Hearthstone cast is finished, you will need a macro. The macro you can see here will guarantee that you can Hearthstone out of every situation as long as your Hearthstone is off cooldown. Be mindful that the Light of Elune will trigger your potion cooldown of 2 minutes, so using it while your Hearthstone is on cooldown might end up being a trap. The quest can be taken in Ashenvale and requires you to kill a few elementals and travel to the Barrens. All in all, it roughly takes 15 to 20 minutes. Really sticky glue. This item is only available to the Horde side. While not quite as strong as the Light of Elune, this is still definitely a keeper. You can net enemies for 10 seconds, which will potentially save your life whenever you have to escape out of a situation where enemies are chasing you. There is not much more to mention about this. If you have already used it up while leveling, don't worry too much about it. This quest can be taken in Dorothea and can be finished within a couple of minutes. Magic Dust. This item is very useful and cheap to get. It is always worth to carry a bunch of them with you. It serves a similar purpose as the really sticky glue. CCing mobs. The magic dust puts an enemy to sleep for 30 seconds. This even works in level 60 dungeons and even on some trash mobs and raids. It can be applied to most living enemies, so it won't work on undead, mechs or elementals. As a side note, it shares a 60-second cooldown with granites. You can either buy this item off the auction house or simply farm it in Westfall on the Dust Devils. Nifty Stopwatch. The Nifty Stopwatch is an amazing trinket to have in hardcore, especially as a fresh 60 when you have none of the actual pre-best trinkets yet. This trinket grants a 40% movement speed for 10 seconds on a 30-minute cooldown. Now, while that might not seem very impressive at first glance, Nifty Stopwatch is very useful since the burst of movement speed will allow you to outrun pretty much anything in the open world, while leaving your potion cooldown untouched. It can be paired with a Lip or Light of Elune to make your escape virtually infallible. The quest chain starts in Badlands and will require a couple of low-level items that can be bought in the auction house. Masterwork target dummies. I want to stress two things here. The first thing is, skill up your engineering. There is no profession that comes even remotely close to being as useful in hardcore when it comes to survivability. The second thing is, don't be cheap. Level your engineering all the way up and use the Masterwork target dummies. The level 40 advanced ones are significantly weaker. Skilling engineering is really not too costly, even if you buy all the mats of the auction house. Chapter 2. Open World. The world in Classic WoW is full of dangers. Roaming high-level elites like Diremaul in Blasted Lands, dangerous caves, and obscure NPCs and questlines. One thing to remember is that you are the person that is responsible for the well-being of yourself, and ultimately has the last say on anything related to your character. If a quest seems sketchy, ask around or look it up. If a dungeon group wants to do some crazy stuff that you are not comfortable with doing, state so, and don't be shy to leave the group if you have a bad gut feeling. Every time you want to take a risk, type /plate, look at the number that pops up, and reconsider how much you want to risk it. Blood of Heroes. The eastern and western plaguelands are full of nasty surprises and should not be taken lightly at any time. One of the most lethal ones is the Blood of Heroes that can be found in both western and eastern plaguelands. Under no circumstances you want to go and loot these alone. Looting this object will spawn up to 2 high-level undead elites that put a 1-minute physical slow on you that cannot be removed by Dispel magic, since it's not considered a magical effect. Looting the Blood of Heroes is one of the fastest ways to get back to Elven if you don't know exactly what you are doing. Winterspring Flightpath. Who doesn't know it? You're starting to fly from Booty Bay to Western Plaguelands, and since the flight will take ages, you're quickly going for a smoke, grabbing a beer, or go making a tea. While this is normally not a problem, there is one exception in the game. The flight path in Winterspring. It is not safe to AFK on this one, as there is a patrolling mob that can get very close to the flight master's position and will aggro on you. Due to the fact that there are no goblin guards nearby, you will get beaten to death. Definitely not something you want to see when returning to your desk. The Onyxia Attunement. Speaking about Winterspring. You will get to the point where you need to speak to Hayley in Winterspring in order to start your attunement quest for Onyxia's lair. First of all, do not try to get there by going through the cave full of Dragonkin elites. The way to go is by jumping mountains to get to her. There are plenty of videos on YouTube for that. I will link one of them in the description. But most important is, do not touch the blue circle on the ground that is right next to her. It will teleport you right into the cave full of elites, and you will most likely die a swift and painful death. Hayley is an NPC that everyone will have to visit at least twice for their Onyxia chain quest, so do not end your adventure due to a small misstep. The Diremaul Arena. The arena in the middle of Diremaul is an open world zone which can have 1 or even 2 bosses of 3 potential spawns in it. These bosses drop random blue BOEs and have a very big HP pool. While one of them is fairly easy to kill, 2 bosses at the same time can be quite a struggle for a 5-man group. Be aware that if you enter the arena, you get flagged for PvP. It is the same mechanic as the arena in Stranglethorn has. Also, if you engage combat with any of the bosses, the door closes and the only way out is to either kill the boss or Hearthstone out. Overall, the arena is a pretty big no-go in hardcore and should be avoided completely. Chapter 3. Vital Potions. Starting with the most known and notorious one here. The Flask of Petrification, also known as Petri. This one is the most important item to have in your bags. If something in your dungeons, raids, or even open world ever goes wrong, this one is the #1 lifesaver you should go for. It makes you immune to 99% of any spells and attacks in the game. Additionally, it drops your threat to 0. The idea to use this item is quite simple in theory. You want to leave the current situation while being in Petri. There is basically two options of doing this, while the first one is usually the way to go. You can achieve this by pressing Petri and immediately pressing Alt F4 within 2 seconds after. This will cause your character to disconnect from the game and therefore disappear out of the game world. This process requires you to be offline for approximately 55 seconds. This means you have to be very fast pressing Alt F4 after you initially hit the Petri button. Any further delay means risking you losing the Petri effect before your character gets automatically disconnected. You now have to wait at least 5 minutes to make sure your character gets teleported to the dungeon or raid's entrance. If you do this in the world outside, you have to either be out of the original pull range of the mob that was attacking you, or if you didn't make it out of that range, you have to use the unstuck feature on the Blizzard website. But be careful here. It might potentially teleport you close to a city of the opposite faction. This was the first and preferred option. The second option looks like this. You can also use the classic double Petri. You pop a Petri first, leave the group or raid, and wait for the automatic teleport 60-second counter, also known as Ghetto Heart, to start. Once it does, you unclick your first Petri and immediately after repop a second one. Be aware that you can get hit by mobs and spells in the millisecond you unpetri, so time it really well. Generally I suggest you to always have at least 2 Petris in your bags. And please, have a keybind for it. Limited Invulnerability Potion, also known as LIP, is a very strong tool to get rid of any current mob attacking you. What does this do? It grants you 6 seconds of immunity against physical attacks. If you ever pull threat on anything as a healer or DPS, you should get used to instantly press LIP. It is important to know that this one does not reset threat, so the attacker will turn towards the person below you in the threat table. In case you are still the highest person on the threat table when the effect of the LIP is running out, the mob will turn back towards you and attack you again. This is specifically important for Onyxia Phase 3, when she's landing, since there's a high risk that if no one manages to catch up in threat to you, that the entire wave will get breathed. So if the lip runs out and you still have aggro, the next thing you should do is Petri. Lips also save you from fall damage, so in case you ever fall down, you use these shortly before you hit the ground. Free Action Potion. Next in line are Free Action Potions, also called FAPs. These provide 30 seconds of stun and root immunity, but will not remove present stuns or roots. While being very useful, they require you to have a bit of game and encounter knowledge. They can only be used effectively if you know when to expect stuns, since you have to pop them preemptively. Later on, when the Zul'Gurub patch is released, you will have living action potions available. These don't suffer the same limitations. Swiftness Potion. The good old Swiftness Potion increases movement speed by 50% for 15 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. Not a lot to say here, since they are pretty self-explaining. Situationally, these can be very good, but overall slightly worse than the Nifty Stopwatch, since these cannot be paired with other potions. Swiftness Potions can be specifically good when you see any danger coming towards you, which is technically still avoidable by not engaging or fighting it at all. Restorative Potion. This one is not being used too often, but when you need it, they are more than worth it. I always have a stack of them in my bags. If you are in a disease or debuff heavy dungeon like Strath Undead or Diremaul West, and you don't have a Dispel, Cleanse or Decurse in your group, you will be very happy to have Restopods with you. There are some nasty debuffs in high level zones and dungeons that last up to 30 minutes. Major Health and Mana Potions. These are blessing and curse at the same time. The most basic potions. Depending on the situation, these can be very powerful. Let's say your tank is one attack away from death and the healer will not get the heal through in time. HP pot will save his life. Or let's say a boss is almost down, but the healer is completely and needs to get the one last additional clutch heal through in order to save the tank. In a perfect world, the HP and mana potions are being used here to save the day. The reason I personally rate them quite low on the list is that they can basically end up being traps. If you pop HP or mana potions too early, you will have a 2-minute cooldown on all the other potions we just talked about earlier. So choose very wisely which potion you want to use. Once things go south, events unfold usually very quickly, and in most sketchy plays you will only have one potion cooldown available overall. So make it count. You might now think, man, that is a lot of items. How can I make sure I have everything? Well, here's a short checklist of everything we have talked about. These are my personal recommendations to go for. Make sure to have all of these items in your bags at any given time. Also make sure to restock everything up. Usually whenever I finish a dungeon, my first way is to the auction house to restock my safety items. Chapter 4. The Pre-Raid Biz Grind. Worldbuffs. Worldbuffs are a very big deal in Classic. They play a huge role when it comes to raiding. To understand how powerful they are, I will give you the following example. A pre-raid geared Fury Warrior, fully world buffed, will do more damage than a Nex Rammus geared Fury Warrior without any world buffs. I recommend you to join your server's official Discord. Most of the servers have a channel where the world buffs are being announced by guildmasters. Now the next question is, how to use them effectively for dungeons. The answer to that is pretty simple. Chronoboons. One of my favorite changes in modern Classic WoW was the introduction of Chronoboons. This item is an absolute game changer when it comes to using world buffs effectively. Why do I mention this here though? In a very recent patch that was originally intended to affect SOD servers only, Blizzard has changed the Chronoboon price from 10 gold down to 1 gold only. The Chronoboons are now so cheap that it is actually worth to boon every world buff you can get your hands on for your dungeons. The Chronoboons can be bought off Chromie in the Western Plaguelands. Make sure to always have a stack or two on you. Once your character receives any world buff, you have to use the Chronoboon in order to store the buff. When you do that, all current active world buffs are getting booned. That means they are no longer active and can be restored whenever you need them. In order to restore your buffs, you just need to click the supercharged Chronoboon displacer in your bags. Since the Chronoboons are very cheap now, make sure to not be greedy and unboon world buffs for spicy dungeons. They will definitely help you a lot. Dungeon Difficulty Tier List. This is my personal dungeon difficulty tier list. That is how I would rank the dungeons in hardcore based on my experience. I don't want to go into details here because this video is not supposed to be a dungeon guide, but nonetheless I will show you a few quick notes to every single dungeon. Sunken Temple. The Sunken Temple is pretty easy since it is quite low level and not tuned for level 60s. In a later phase, people will have to run it in order to complete their class quests. Specifically, warriors need their diamond flask since it is a massive trinket. Generally, there is not a lot of good loot in here, so it might be hard to find a group full of 60s for it. It can be good practice since the dungeon is quite big and requires a bit of coordination and communication. Also, don't forget to clear all the dragons before you try to pull the last boss. BRD. BRD, especially in the early part, is quite low level and therefore pretty smooth to clear with a group full of 60s. Considering it is not a level 60 dungeon, it offers great loot. It has several pre-raid biz pieces in it. You can finish your Molten Core attunement in a single full run and get the most annoying part of your Onyxia quest chain done as well. It gets a little more spicy towards the end, but nothing too dangerous. Diremaul East. Diremaul East is the easiest part of the 3 Diremaul dungeons. It has several potential book spawns in it, and the bosses also have a small chance to drop the class books. There are some decent pre-raid biz pieces in here. Jump runs can be a very good gold farm and can be done within 10 to 12 minutes. Since you need a key to open the doors towards Diremaul West and Diremaul North, you want to run Diremaul East at least once to get the key. Lower Blackrock Spire. LBRS is still relatively easy. Maybe slightly harder than BRD. You can loot the 3 gems for the UBRS key here. There are some good recipe drops, for example the Robe of the Archmage or the Greater Fire Protection Potion. The last boss is dropping a quest that ultimately leads to a very good trinket reward. Strath Living. It is very easy to find people for Strath Living. People farm this dungeon for the orbs, since they are needed for the Crusader enchant. It provides good practice to learn and handle pulling for the tank. Mages make your life easier here, since you can basically sheep a mob in every single pull. There are a few decent drops in here, but nothing really good for warriors. Scholomance. Scholo is quite a step up in terms of difficulty compared to the dungeons mentioned before, but still quite easy if everyone knows what to do. The tank should bring 2 fabs, one for Rattlegore and one for Krestinov. Priests help a lot here. Shackle is really strong to have in Scholo. There is Dark Runes dropping for the healer, quite good to stack up on them for the raids later on. Every melee DPS and tank will go here at least once for the Myra's Song quest. Strath UD. In my opinion, Strath UD is a bit harder than Living. Just as in Scholo, a priest helps a lot here because of the shackle. Also, Fear Ward is really good to have in here. There is a mind control boss, so make sure you can trust your group. A mage to kite the shadow guards is also very nice to have. You can get a great trinket out of here with either plus attack power or plus spell power on it. Diremaul North or Tribute Run. If you clear a DMT run, then you will be able to pick up the Worldbuffs after. Rogues, be very careful here. The dogs have a true sight ability, which allows them to see you from even further away when you are stealthed. You have access to the library here, for example to turn in class trinket quests or for the Mage Water quest. You kinda need reliable CC here, since some of the packs with a lot of brutes in them can hurt pretty badly. There are some dangerous patrol pathings in here, so take your time and pull safely. Upper Blackrock Spire. UBRS has some really good loot in it. The Dull Rend set, the Feldstriker, and countless other items. It only really gets spicy after the Rend event, so if you only go for Jet Rend runs, I would say the difficulty would be medium. Make sure that you either have a mage or hunter in the group who is able to kite the last boss. I also recommend you to bring 2 Greater Fire Protection Potions. You can pop them after Rend. There is quite a lot of fire damage outgoing in the later part. Diremaul West. Diremaul West is potentially the hardest 5-man dungeon. But don't be scared. With a good and communicative group, it is still very doable without any major risk. Any decursing class in the group definitely helps a lot, since there are some nasty curses in here. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of good loot pieces in here. That's one of the reasons why it is pretty hard to build a group for this. Conclusion and general advice. If you ever plan to raid, there is basically no way to avoid the pre-raid bis grind. Take your time with it and never enter a dungeon when you are short in time or don't feel focused at all. It is very important to make sure to get 5 of 5 people into the voice chat. Most people nowadays use Discord, and even if they just join to listen, it makes sketchy situations much more controllable. It is all about coordination. Voice chat allows you to make sure your group either commits to the fight or decides to escape together. If people refuse to join voice, I strongly encourage you to reconsider if you actually want to stay. It was mentioned earlier, but you should definitely create the Ghetto-HS-Macro. Even if you don't have the Light of Elune anymore, you can still use this macro to leave the group and trigger the 60-second teleport timer. This macro also works if you are alone in the dungeon, or if you are the leader of the group. Last but not least, I want to recommend you to use the LFG tool in-game. The tool makes it quite easy to build groups with a good setup. You can even put notes if you are looking for some specific class or whatever. I personally use this one all the time when I'm building dungeon groups. That was my fresh level 60 guide hardcore edition. Thank you guys for watching. If you found this video helpful, I would be very happy if you drop a like on it and subscribe to my channel. You can gladly take this video and pin it into your guild's Discord. My old guild had a Fresh 60 guide channel, where we would send every freshly dinged 60 to, so they would go through the guide before doing anything else. We did achieve a pretty low death rate by doing this. That being said, thank you guys for watching and make sure to comment on anything which you think I missed. See you guys on the next video.